Yuri Prohaska, a modern-day samurai. He stands straight in front of his opponents, often with his hands low and his head constantly moving. Yet he dominates. With 31 wins and only 5 losses, he's one of the most dangerous light heavyweights in the UFC. In just his second UFC fight, he knocked out Dominic Reyes with a spinning elbow. He said he didn't train the move. It just came to him, like an idea caught by his hair, which he called his Wi-Fi antenna. Yuri fights in a very unique way. He throws punches from strange angles, switches stances in the middle of combos, and uses spinning kicks without warning. He follows the samurai way, inspired by the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. He regularly trains in forests, using trees as punching bags, and strikes makiwara boards 500 times a day. When he's not training, he spends days meditating in a dark room without food or water, and frequently reads a samurai book. In a sport full of killers, Yuri Prohaska is completely different. He likes to fight but not hurt people. Yet he still became the UFC light heavyweight champion. Dricus du Plessis. He fights like a man who just learned how to punch last week. Except he's doing it in the UFC and hasn't lost a single fight since joining. His style? Hard to define. His footwork can look clumsy and his mouth often hangs open like he's gassed out. But don't let the appearance fool you. He's got freakish cardio and relentless pressure. Every punch he throws comes with full commitment, like he's swinging with bowling balls in his gloves. And because there's no clear rhythm to his movement, opponents struggle to time him. That unpredictability leads to frustration and mistakes. No, he's not the cleanest striker. He's not the fastest. Not the most technical either, but he gets results. He's finished 6 of the 9 fighters he's faced in the UFC, including top-tier names like Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya. Now he sits at the top of the middleweight division, proving time and time again. It doesn't have to look pretty to get the job done. Tony Ferguson. The UFC had never seen anyone quite like him. His style was so unpredictable, from throwing punches at his opponent's legs to rolling across the octagon to escape or reposition. At his peak, Ferguson went on a 12-fight win streak and was considered as the most dangerous lightweight in the division. Much of his success was credited to his bizarre and intense training methods. These included slamming his arms and shins against metal poles to toughen his bones, flipping massive tractor tires, swinging a sledgehammer while balancing on a gym ball, throwing baseballs to build knockout power, and doing backflips and somersaults just to warm up. Then there were the strange moments, talking to himself during training, shadowboxing imaginary opponents, and regularly taunting fellow fighters. He famously nicknamed Khabib Tiramisu and Conor McNuggets during their UFC careers. Tony was already known as one of the weirdest fighters in MMA history, but after his first loss following that 12-fight streak, things took an even stranger turn. He went on to lose 8 fights in a row, giving him the longest losing streak in UFC history. Johnny Walker. He fights like a mix between a parkour athlete and someone who's had way too many energy drinks. It's always all or nothing with him. Either he delivers a highlight reel knockout, or he ends up as the highlight himself. His weird, unpredictable style is a big part of that. He's constantly on the move, switching stances, bouncing side to side, and changing rhythms on the fly. Walker strikes from bizarre angles, often off balance, but lands simply because no one sees it coming. He loves risky, flashy techniques, flying knees, spinning back fists, you name it. But that wildness comes at a price. He sometimes overcommits and leaves himself wide open for counters. And if you think the fight is wild, just wait until he wins. At UFC 235, after a brutal flying knee KO over Misha Cirkunov, Johnny tried to celebrate with the worm and ended up dislocating his own shoulder. Johnny loves celebrating so much that even on his walk to the cage, he's already dancing, swinging his hips like he's on the floor of a nightclub. Colin Fletcher. He went by the nickname Freak Show, and he absolutely lived up to it. With white face paint, black nails, and teeth filed into fangs, he looked like a villain from a horror movie. But behind the scary mask was a kind, funny, and down-to-earth guy. Fletcher made it all the way to the finals of The Ultimate Fighter, The Smashes, where he came up short against Norman Park. He had one more bout in the UFC before continuing his career in BAMMA and Bellator. But it wasn't his fights that people remember. It was the way he stood out. His over-the-top clown-themed entrances were so outrageous, they earned him a spot on the weirdest fighters in UFC history list. Israel Adesanya. With 12 straight title fights, Israel Adesanya is one of the best middleweights in UFC history. But he's also one of the strangest. He's obsessed with anime, even calling himself the Last Stylebender, a name inspired by Avatar. He's shown up dressed like anime characters, dyed his hair pink, and painted his nails. But his weirdness doesn't stop there. At UFC 253, after knocking out Paulo Costa, Adesanya humped Costa's unconscious body, then doubled down in an interview saying Costa deserved to be embarrassed. And that wasn't the only strange moment in the cage. He once pretended to pee like a dog against the cage during a walkout. In press conferences, he screamed things like, "I'll leave him frozen like Elsa," and even showed up wearing a dog collar around his neck. Other weird highlights include his viral video where he appeared to be playing a little too intimately with his dog. And at UFC 290, after Dricus du Plessis defeated Robert Whittaker and claimed he would be the first true African champion to bring a belt home to Africa, Adesanya stormed into the octagon and aggressively called Dricus his African brother. In a sport full of tough guys, Israel Adesanya stands out, not just for how he fights, but for how unapologetically weird he is. Michel Pereira. He doesn't just fight in the UFC, he turns every fight into a live-action video game. One moment he's launching a Superman punch off the cage, the next he's backflipping onto a grounded opponent, and seconds later he's throwing a flying knee. His wild fighting style somehow worked, right from the start. In his UFC debut, he delivered a flying knee knockout against Danny Roberts. He followed that up with a first-round TKO over Andrei Petroski and a first-round submission win against Ihor Potieria. But Pereira's showmanship can be a double-edged sword. Sometimes he prioritizes entertaining the fans over winning, like in his fight with Tristan Connolly, where he lost by unanimous decision. The fight after that, even worse. He was disqualified for landing an illegal knee to a grounded Diego Sanchez. Michel Pereira doesn't just fight, he puts on a show. And while his recent fights show a more measured, less chaotic version of himself, he's still one of the most entertaining fighters on the roster. Jason Miller. He was never a UFC champion, but he definitely made his mark in the UFC. Inside the octagon, he once faced legends like GSP, but outside of it, Miller was completely unhinged. He once stormed the cage during Jake Shields' post-fight interview, shouting for a rematch, which triggered an all-out brawl with the Diaz brothers. Miller returned to the UFC a year later, but it didn't last long. After suffering a second consecutive loss against CB Dollaway, Dana White cut him from the roster, citing not only the losses but also undisclosed backstage antics. But things only got stranger. After being banned from the UFC, Miller appeared on Ariel Helwani's show fully in character as his movie persona Lucky Patrick. He trashed the set and stormed out mid-interview. Later, he broke into a church, spray-painted walls, set off fire extinguishers, and fell asleep naked. His downward spiral continued with multiple arrests, including an alleged assault on law enforcement and a dramatic standoff with a SWAT team at his own home. Diego Sanchez, winner of the very first season of The Ultimate Fighter and a veteran with over 30 fights under his belt. His record screams warrior, but nearly everything else about him screams bizarre. From doing yoga in the middle of a thunderstorm to getting into an intense argument with Stephan Bonnar about asparagus. His walkouts were always something else. One time he came out holding a cross in his hand, and who could forget the iconic "Yes, yes, yes" chant that had the whole crowd fired up? Nicknamed the Nightmare, Diego was always full of entertainment. But things really went off the rails when he teamed up with the strange and mysterious guru, Joshua Fabia. Despite all the strange moments, fans still love Diego, not just because he's a Hall of Fame brawler, but because there's simply no one like him. Michael Page. He isn't your average fighter, and you know that the moment you see him throw on a Pokemon trainer cap and literally roll a Pokeball at his unconscious opponent right after landing a flying knee so brutal, it fractured the guy's skull. MVP's fighting style is like watching a mix between the Karate Kid and a flashy Street Fighter, wrapped in a highlight reel package. He fights with his hands down by his sides, relying on insane reflexes, head movement, and awkward angles to dodge strikes. And somehow it works. You never know what's coming next, a flying knee, a spinning kick, or a surprise elbow. But his weirdness doesn't stop with his fighting style. MVP is known for full-on showboating in the cage, dancing, moonwalking, taunting his opponents mid-fight. It's entertaining, no doubt, but he once paid the price for showboating a little too much and took an unexpected loss. After spending most of his career in Bellator, MVP made the jump to the UFC, and in his debut he faced Kevin Holland, and proved that his unorthodox style can work at the highest level. But when he ran into Ian Gary, things changed. Gary exposed the hole in MVP's game, wrestling. With no solid base to defend to takedowns, MVP suffered his first UFC loss. Mike Perry. He isn't just a weird fighter, he's basically a walking reality show with fists. This is the guy who once decided his girlfriend, who had zero MMA experience, should be his only cornerman for a UFC fight. His stare-downs? Oh boy. Before his UFC 202 debut, he faked a handshake with Hyun-Gyu Lim, then suddenly shouted, "Thought you had a friend, boy," right in his face. And before UFC 245, instead of shaking hands with Jeff Neal, he asked him to punch him in the stomach. Then there's his bizarre love-hate bromance with Darren Till. After Till called him out, Perry responded by literally punching himself in the face. The fight never happened, but what followed was an online trolling war so strange that fans couldn't tell if they were best friends or about to throw down at any moment. It only got weirder. At one point, Perry claimed he was 2% African, based on a DNA test, and used that to justify dropping the N-word on camera. Oh, and let's not forget the moments where he was vibing to his opponent's walkout music while standing in the cage. Somehow, all of this led to Perry becoming the face of bare-knuckle boxing, a sport that honestly fits him way too well. Bryce Mitchell. He should be known for pulling off one of the rarest submissions in UFC history, the Twister. But somehow, that's not what most people remember him for. Instead, he's just as famous for thinking the Earth is flat, gravity isn't real, seatbelts don't work, and that planets don't actually exist. Then there's the deer story, where he claimed he once choked out a wild deer in the woods. Did it happen? Who knows? Only Bryce does. He's also said that his ex-girlfriend was a witch who was casting demon spells on him, and that those spells were ruining his life. That whole experience is what led him to Christianity. But the demons didn't stop there. Ahead of his fight with Jean Silva, he claimed Silva had sent more demons to haunt his dreams. But by far the most controversial thing he's done was on a podcast, where he defended Hitler as someone who fought for his country and questioned the Holocaust. UFC boss Dana White called it disgusting, though he didn't take any action. Bryce later apologized, explaining that he was simply trying to express his point of view. And then there's his obsession with his camo fight shorts. He once told Dana White he'd fight UFC security if he wasn't allowed to wear them, and somehow Dana gave in. Bryce Mitchell is a man fighting two battles. One inside the octagon, and another inside a world that only he seems to understand.